A couple of weeks ago, a game named The Ghosts of Yotai was announced. It had a female lead, and that went over about as well as you would expect it would. As an example of some of the tweets that were made, Ghost of Tsushima's sequel stars a Japanese woman samurai warrior because of course it does. They can't help themselves until every franchise that was built on masculinity is replaced by women. Ghost of Yotai is hopefully a smaller spin-off game, but if this is the true sequel and this is the new main character over Jin Seika, so sick of the forced girl boss narrative, man. There were many similar comments like this made about the game, despite the fact that nothing is known about the game yet. They don't know if the character is going to be good or bad. It's merely a reaction to the character being a female lead. What I believe the cause of this reaction is, for a good span of time, a lot of female characters were being pushed very hard in media, and a lot of them were bad. And the reaction, if you didn't like them, was to basically call names and said that you just didn't like them because they were female characters, even though there were plenty of reasons to dislike these female heroines, which I have covered on this channel. As a person who wants there to be more female heroines, I can admit that these new modern day ones weren't done very well. But while many people argue for years that it was never about the female characters and instead just the writing, it seems that some people have let the pendulum swing back too far, so that now they have become everything that they were accused of being, so now they just don't like female characters in general. Says one tweet, "At this point it's simple for me. I'm so burnt out with female lead characters in any media. Even if the game could be excellent, I don't give a crap anymore." That's the conditioning that they have, I guess, worked over on me, that I don't care. I don't want to see another woman-led franchise. I will get excited when I see something that looks like it belonged in 2008, not 2024. I'm pretty sure Lara Croft came out before then, but moving forward, this is something that if you are a person following a lot of nerdy content that I've seen grow up over the past several years, and I've covered on this channel before, the idea of the pendulum swinging way too back the other way, so that it doesn't just become about a handful of badly done female heroines, but it just becomes backlash against female heroes in general. I first saw it when it came to the movie Prey, which actually turned out to be decent. I saw it earlier this year with Furiosa, and it's just gradually becoming a lot more commonplace to attack things over it having female characters than over the writing itself. This is also what happens with movies like Madam Web, for example, which I've also covered, where even though it made no attempt to attack the audience that would bash it or make things about a gender war, there were still people out there who tried to make it about that and tried to make false claims about how the movie was advertising itself and what actresses said. And a lot of that has washed over to accusations that women themselves are the ones who ruin these pieces of media behind the scenes, as there's been a lot of disappointment in geeky media lately. It happened when Jennifer Lee stepped down from Disney from being the CEO of their animated division to just going back to the Frozen sequels, and I am all for her stepping down because I think she did a terrible job as CEO. However, there were definitely people out there who made it about her being a woman for why she did a bad job. Says one comment, "These women have not just wrecked corporate America, but proven that too often men were the great talent in the past that entertained and innovated the movies billions of people have loved." And as a follow-up to that comment, of course we were. Same in gaming. Everybody is wondering why gaming sucks nowadays, why AAA is so buggy and trash. It's because all the women now in the industry. It seems that now it's commonplace after all of the tensions between gender and pushing female characters and women in positions of leadership, that is now commonplace to just blame them for being women. A tweet went viral recently with 56,000 likes, which was supposed to be in response to someone who was talking about how men need to create safe spaces for themselves and each other and pursue therapy, instead of perpetuating the very behavior system that they handicapped in the first place. The response tweet for that was, "Men had Star Wars, women invaded. Men had sci-fi, women invaded. Men had video games, women invaded. Men had D&D, women invaded. Men had comics, women invaded. Men had men's-only clubs, women invaded. The only thing men have anymore is either solidarity or you fuss at us for it." Now, I'm not defending the original comment that was made, talking about men's health. I'm not taking a side on that, and I am going to be fair to the guy who made the viral tweet that he did come back and walk back on it a little bit. However, I'm just using these as examples of the kind of talk that's gone around, that these were amazing franchises that men loved, and then women came in and wrecked them all, and the women in positions of leadership came in and wrecked them all. Especially, I've heard that a lot about the MCU and Star Wars. Women ruins the MCU, women ruin Star Wars, but did we? Did women ruin the MCU? Well, that's why I'm making this video, because I wanted to finally admit I did. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Seriously though, I think maybe the start of this video should be debunking the idea that women ruin everything they touch in creativity and that they ruin things that men like inherently, like we have an inherent desire to do that. Because just because there's a bad apple out there like Jennifer Lee or Kathleen Kennedy that's done a very bad job does not mean that there weren't plenty of women behind the scenes who worked on these projects in the past. The truth is, Hollywood has always been a bit of a boys' club. I mean, very infamously, it was not a great place for women to work because of the Harvey Weinsteins and the P. Diddy's of the world, though he seemed like he was just going after everyone. But anyway, it was very infamous of being a very abusive industry and a very abusive industry for women where it's hard for them to work in it. However, that does not mean that there haven't always been women working in prominent positions on shows that people love. You've got Martha Lucas, who edited the original Star Wars films and was also responsible for editing 2 Scorsese films, Gail Ann Hurd, who refined James Cameron's Terminator script and helped him get it made, Marilyn Monroe, who was one of the first female producers, the female executive of Fox who put her career on the line to get X-Men the Animated Series made, which was probably the most instrumental thing in pushing the popularity of that series to date. And she also was instrumental in making sure that female characters like Storm and Rogue got a push in the series, despite the idea that not as many female action characters sell. Then you've got Mary Harron, who directed American Psycho, the female directors who did many successful comedies and rom-coms throughout the 90s and early 2000s. Star Trek, the original series, had many female writers like DC Fontana working on the scripts for many of their episodes. One Redditor estimates that 42% of season 3 of the original series was either written or co-written by women. Galen Suzman, who literally saved Toy Story 2 after someone tried to delete it from all of Pixar's servers. And these are just a handful of people that I can pick out from different areas of Hollywood that have contributed to these very, very successful movies. In short, even though with the way Hollywood has been in the past, there have always been talented female creators working on the media we enjoy. There's nothing about your gender that says that you can't be a good creator or that you can't take a genuine interest in things like sci-fi. So we can get that out of the way. It's never that just because women are working on a project that means it's going to be bad or out to attack its male fan base whatsoever. That also isn't to say that there aren't plenty of women out there who enjoy these properties. And this is a very broad topic, but I'm just going to primarily be using the MCU as an example just to whittle it down a little bit. But these days, in order to really gatekeep the MCU as it's gone downhill, much more strong emphasis on the MCU being a boys brand has been put on it, and saying that the problem is that the MCU has been turned into a girls brand. In fact, that's also what they say about Star Wars. But I think that this emphasis on exactly which gender the franchise is for has been a little bit exaggerated. If you look at the box office demographics for these films, a film like Avengers Endgame had an opening weekend of 57% of a male audience, and that is definitely skewing male. However, that means a whopping 43% of the audience that got Avengers Endgame to its billion-dollar opening were women, contributing about $400 million to the box office. Similarly, a film like Star Wars The Force Awakens had a 58% opening weekend from male audiences, and that means 42% of its box office was contributed by women as well. Compare that to a film like Barbie that had a 66% opening for women and almost had a 70% female opening on its Friday. In other words, even though things like Marvel and Star Wars were ultimately more male skewing, they actually did a pretty good job at appealing to both genders. And plenty of female fans out there helped contribute to the success of these films. And I can speak from my own experience as a girl growing up loving these characters and just loving action and sci-fi and all of that. I could always talk to my female friends about Marvel because all of my female friends were enjoying Marvel and would always know the next trailer or the next thing coming out. Now, as time passed, I can't do that anymore. All my female friends say that they've given up even paying attention to it because it's gotten so bad. Because good stories do appeal to everyone, regardless if they technically said for boys or for girls, and bad stories don't appeal to anyone. It was really about the characters that brought us on board. But of course, there is a source for all this complaining about female characters in these movies and it being turned into a girls brand. So let's explore exactly what that is. Now, what is very factual about what Marvel has been doing is they have been definitely trying to promote a lot of female characters in their movies. I think Kevin Feige said at one point that he wanted to see 50% split between male and female characters in the MCU. Now, that is ridiculous. Why? Because to me, that kind of mandate is going to stunt creativity, where it's not about if you're creating good characters, it's just about getting a certain ratio. That is a terrible idea. And I think that it has showed in a lot of their content that there are a lot of female characters being pushed in media. For example, the Loki TV show really ended up prominently featuring the character called Sylvie, even getting the big moment at the end of the first season. Moon Knight introduced a character called Layla, who also becomes a superhero a little bit randomly at the end, and it's kind of awkwardly placed in the show. Thor Love and Thunder had Jane Foster Thor in it. You know, we can see everywhere that there was definitely a strong push for female characters. A lot of people point to the fact of the big girl power moment in the end of Avengers Endgame feeling very inorganic and very in your face, and being the start of the downfall of the MCU, to getting to a point where it was just about relentlessly promoting these female characters and tearing down all the male characters as a result. Now, once again, it is factual that Marvel really wanted to push a lot more female characters in prominent roles, and in my opinion, it did lead to some ridiculous decision-making down the line. There also was a lot of talk during this time that the original characters of the series, many of which who happened to be male, were talked down to in order to promote the new female characters more. Once again, it is factual that they did want to promote more female characters, and I can agree that some of the way they went about this led to some pretty silly story decisions. Like Kevin Feige admitting the reason they didn't want Doctor Strange in WandaVision when he was originally supposed to be is they didn't want a man being the one to mentor the female character or bring her back from her dark side or anything like that. So this obviously created a lot of problems. And listen, the problem with a lot of this stuff is that it did feel very inorganic and shoehorned. Like that scene in the end of Avengers Endgame. Like everybody at that point in the context of the scene is just fighting as hard as they can to stop the entire universe from being disintegrated. So why at this point in the story would it just happen to be all the female characters who join up while the male characters are idle? They're all desperately fighting from the universe to get destroyed. Or the ending of Moon Knight, which once again, I actually kind of like the character of Layla up to this point, but to have her just stop in the middle of a battlefield so a little girl can praise her for being an Egyptian superhero was very in your face. This sort of thing is like Marvel stopping their stories and saying, hey, look, we did this. Give us praise. We did it. We did it. And that's why it actually didn't help these female characters, because a lot of these female characters were just put in these shows, potentially through mandate, were not built up properly and were very in your face. And once again, people will go back to Avengers Endgame as the point of when it started and when the MCU subsequently went downhill. However, did you know that Marvel was actually starting to push female characters more and harder before that moment in Avengers Endgame? It happened in Black Panther with a very, very strong female supporting cast, and no one complained about it. Likely because it was done well. The female characters were well integrated into the story. They felt organic, so of course no one would complain about it. I mean, it arguably happened with other female characters being promoted and pushed in the MCU in Phase 3, like Valkyrie and Thor Ragnarok. Once again, even though I don't really care for Valkyrie, she didn't feel inorganic to the story. She was there for a reason to help them off the planet. What's happened in the MCU post Phase 3 would be the equivalent if Valkyrie stopped the story for a minute to say, hey, I'm a new female character, you better like me. The problem with this kind of thing and how it went forward with female characters is the way it was done. Not the idea of merely having more female characters, but the way it was done. With that, we might want to talk about Marvel becoming a girls brand. And I've had people write to me and tell them that the best way they can explain it to themselves of why they don't like Marvel anymore is because it's a girls brand. And that annoys me because I know what girls brands look like, and I can tell you that ain't Marvel, not even with all their pushing of female characters. If you want to see a girls brand, think Barbie, for example. That's not really what Marvel is most of the time. Like, I can compare that to Star Wars shows like Ahsoka, for example. That was called a girls brand, and I'm like, why? Because it has a mostly female cast? It's a dour, somber, serious show with a ridiculous slow pace, which is what I would attribute to it not being very good. Not the fact that it just has a mostly female cast. Just putting a mostly female cast in a show or movie does not make it inherently girly. But even if a property like a TV show or a movie does have a more girly skew, that doesn't mean that men can't and won't enjoy it. For example, Wonder Woman, I think, is a movie that comes from a more feminine perspective, yet men really enjoyed that movie. Hunger Games, actually, going to high school, teenage boys like those books just the same as teenage girls like those books. Anyway, Marvel, I do not think that the problem is it's a girls brand, because that would give into the idea, if the core problem is that it's a girls brand, that it makes it sound like Marvel is still as good as ever. It's still well-written movies. It's just that the problem is that they're trying to make them appeal to girls and not men. But that's not what's happening. These are terribly written movies. They don't appeal to anyone, regardless of what their tone is trying to be. First of all, the shows that come out, still most of their leads are men, and most of them are still going with the action show or action movie tone. I didn't really think that in too many projects the tone was really changed, except the humor got a lot worse. But let's look at a show like She-Hulk, and a lot of people look at this thing as trying to be a Marvel show that's more appealing to women. But the problem with She-Hulk is not that it's more appealing to women. The problem is that it actually isn't appealing to women, because absolutely no one wants to watch a show about a narcissist who only cares about her next hookup or promotion. Just because the idea maybe behind She-Hulk was this will be more appealing to women, that does not mean that it will be. And to me, it speaks a little less towards people behind the scenes who want to specifically make things to appeal to women, but rather perhaps the narcissism of the people working on these shows, and what we would see a lot with many of these people not even reading the source material. And this is factual for both the men and women working behind the scenes, because that's a big deal, as people are trying to accuse it of just being women coming in and destroying these properties. There's a lot of men behind these scenes who worked on these films and destroyed them, like Taika Waititi, who ruined Thor because he didn't appreciate the character, or Michael Waldron, who worked on Doctor Strange 2. And since we're talking about Hollywood mostly being a male-dominated industry up to this point, you might want to notice that if there were bad women working on these projects, they were probably hired by men. But while I agree that the shoehorning of female characters was part of the problem with Phase 4, and that it didn't work out, and that they didn't actually produce any memorable, popular female characters, because let me tell you, rather than doing 50% female cast, 50% male, one female character that really works with people and people want to see more of is far more valuable than 100 forgettable ones. But I do believe that there's a lot of people who are zeroing in on the problem with female characters and the way that they were promoted in Marvel movies, ignoring that there were a lot of other circumstances to explain why Marvel went sour. It wasn't just because of trying to promote female characters more or trying to appeal to more women and inadvertently just pushing them away. First of all, there was the firing of James Gunn, where Kevin Feige and co.'s original plans for the MCU Phase 4 were to be a space-focused story led by James Gunn, starting with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. These plans were completely uprooted in 2019 when Gunn suddenly was fired for offensive tweets. This was the first step in sending the MCU into a state of chaos, where future plans had to be entirely reworked now that Gunn would be unavailable for the foreseeable future. Then COVID happened, which would also derail the MCU's plans and affect shows like WandaVision, which had its ending severely messed up by this. But COVID's more devastating effects on the MCU would be felt more so by the panic that it gave studios. They became convinced that there would never be a theater industry after the fact, and that streaming was the future. This is why such a ridiculous amount of shows, movies, and content from Marvel and Star Wars were greenlighted during and right after the pandemic. The churn of new content, however, would lead to nothing but disaster. Multiple films would start filming without having scripts. Stars from Thor, Love and Thunder, Doctor Strange 2, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, and the Marvels have all recounted stories on how they would show up on set day to day with absolutely no idea what they were supposed to be filming. Some actors would just give up even trying to read the scripts because they would know that the pages would be changed the next day. The fix-it-and-post attitude led to VFX artists tirelessly working on shots only to have Marvel completely change what they wanted them to be, days before the shows and movies were supposed to release. And the worst thing about this is Marvel greenlit so much content during this time that as some of these films would flop or underperform, they couldn't just course correct right then. They would have 4 other shows in the movies already in the can, ready to come out. And that isn't even getting to other factors out of their control, like the passing of Chadwick Boseman and the Jonathan Majors controversy, which also derailed original plans or added to more drama that the studio didn't originally have. And during all of this content churn, Kevin Feige was said to be spread more thin than ever and couldn't oversee the production like he used to. And something that I would like to point out in all of this, and the reason why Marvel downfalled, is despite the push for more female characters, number one, they didn't always take over the male characters' roles like people said. Like, Jane Foster was actually a part that was praised in Thor: Love and Thunder. The problem wasn't her. The problem was that Taika Waititi had no respect for the Thor character. Or Kate Bishop, for example, was a character who looked up to Hawkeye and wanted to be like him despite the idea that male characters could never be mentors. But here's the thing, if the MCU was destroyed simply by the push to have female characters appear in prominent heroic roles and being good role models and all that, then why were certain characters not immune to the character assassinations? The worst character assassination in all the MCU post the Infinity Saga was Scarlet Witch, because Michael Waldron had an idea for her going evil and no one could tell him no on it. She is by far the most ruined character, the most destroyed character in all the MCU, turned into a crazy witch while she used to be a hero and then killed off. Or, for example, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Despite being called Ant-Man and the Wasp, Hope Van Dyne, the Wasp, barely appears in the film and barely does anything because the writers very clearly, and I think they said this, didn't know what to do with her. To say something like the MCU is destroyed because they were just pushing more female characters or trying to make it a more of a girl-friendly thing is just not encompassing everything that went wrong. I can agree that the way they tried to promote female characters during this time wasn't good, but it is not solely the core problem of everything going on. Even female characters that were supposed to be promoted face the consequences of this studio in absolute chaos. And meanwhile, some people like Nia DaCosta, for example, who directed The Marvels, she is a director with experience, but she was kind of thrown under the bus and made to blame for this project when it was really actually made by the executives at Marvel and not her. With all this said, the MCU in its current form isn't really appealing to anyone right now, regardless of gender, when it used to be. But the reason I made this video is because I've been talking for a while about the pendulum swing too far back, that all the antagonism between studios and fans over female characters and all of the bad female characters are going to make the pendulum swing back too far. And in my opinion, that's already happened with comments about the ghost of Yotai, or the comments about women intentionally coming in to ruin all of men's hobbies. And while I think a lot of the criticisms about how female characters have been lately are justified, and I've done several videos of them, there's some that just get downright ridiculous. Like, I've heard that Laura shooting X-24 as Logan dies was some sort of statement about girl power. I thought it made perfect sense. Logan was always meant to die at the end of the film. Laura and X-24 are extensions of his character, X-24 representing the monster side of Logan, and Laura representing the side of him that has the ability to change. At the end of the movie, it proves that Logan was able to change Laura and set her on a better path than he faced, so that was a victory for him. It was representative of having Laura be the one shoot X-24 that his better side won out. And exactly what did they want to change about this? Did they want Logan to somehow have the adamantium bullet gun and shoot X-24 as he was dying while Laura just sits there and screams or something? You know, finagling a story and mangling it just to make sure that the female character is always the hero or something like that is bad storytelling, but it's also going to be bad storytelling if you finagle the story to make sure that the male character always comes on top and gets the final blow at the end, even when he's supposed to die. And that's a bit of the concern I'm seeing lately, because while a lot of people seem to not be acknowledging it, studios have shifted. Gone are the days of Ghostbusters 2016, where they try to go to war with fans over whether or not they'll see a movie with female characters. Variety recently did an article bemoaning the fact that studios are in fact starting to listen to fans because they've seen that controversies like this aren't helpful, and we're also seeing that happen in the movies and shows they release. There was recently a trailer for a film called Ballerina, which looks absolutely amazing, and it looks like everything a Black Widow film should have been, and this one got a tiny bit of hate I saw, but it mostly received praise. Why? Because this time the female character acknowledges that she's weaker and that she has to use something other than strength to fight her enemies. Now, that's all very well and good for a story, but this kind of goes back to something that I've thought was ridiculous for a long time. The idea that women in action movies cannot fight men or beat them up because that is unrealistic because they don't have as much upper body strength, and that therefore there must always be another way for her to fight. And I think that's ridiculous because it's ignoring the fact fact that anytime you see any action hero beating up hordes of men and performing impossible tasks single-handedly by themselves, it's always an unrealistic fantasy. An action hero or a superhero is meant to be a fantasy character. The entire point of them is, we know this isn't possible in real life, but what if one person could do this? So it doesn't matter to me whether or not a female character is beating people up or is said to use some other kind of means to do so. But the reason I'm bringing up Ballerina is that, and making sure that she goes to John Wick and asks him for advice, which I'm all for, is good. And it's an example of Hollywood listening to complaints like putting down original characters in order to prop up legacy ones. But I am worried that some of the more negative ideas that have come up from a lot of this hate are going to crop up too. Another example would be, apparently Bucky is supposed to be the leader of the Thunderbolts instead of Yelena, like was originally promised. Now, once again, I love Bucky. This could be great. I think it actually sounds really interesting to have him as the leader, but I think it is a response to how hard female characters have been pushed, and the opposite would be bad too. It would be wrong to say that a female character can never have a male mentor figure, or that it always has to be a female character in a leadership role. But likewise, it would also be bad if these studios let the pendulum swing too far the other way and think that it always must be a male character in the lead role. It always must not be a female character, because their audience will get mad if it's ever a female character in the role. The opposite extreme is just as bad, and that's what I want to talk against. I also made this video to remind that there's plenty of female fans of these characters and properties who aren't obsessed with who the gender of anyone is, but just love these characters for who they are. And for me personally, I don't want to be known as just a female fan of Marvel. I'm just a fan of Marvel. I guarantee I know these characters better than people who worked on films like Love and Thunders, but I would invite people to please see that change is happening, and to please not let this poisonous mindset of that it's just a problem whenever there's a female character and that you should reject them at any time come in your head, because there's plenty of great female characters out there, and it would be just as bad as saying that you never want to see a female character in an action role as if somebody were to say, I never want to see a male character in an action movie role. There's a lot more that could be said about this topic, but that is all I got for you guys today. Thank you, patrons, as always, for watching this video. If you want to support me on Patreon, check out the link in the description. I have a brand new short film I'm working on that is coming out, so I hope you will stay tuned for that, and I will see you guys next time.